It was, two professors and me
What were the exact things that you were researching?
going kind of from 0 to 60 pretty fast. At some point, you got to start. It can't all just be all of that was wrong, but we didn't know that. Distribution is challenging.
The first attempts were failing.
The end of their story is long after the end of my story, right?
You can't hurry things in winemaking, especially if you are thinking about it.
But ultimately, I lost my courage, and it's just, so to my great discredit, I did not try anything here. You don't want to confuse people with choice.
All the legendary huge chateaus in Bordeaux and Burgundy, people think that we are these magic voodoo people.
I feel like we're building a community.
Hello everyone, this is the Zaparpat podcast, and today my guest is Evan Bellingar. He has a degree in horticulture from the Oregon State University, and actually he was the first graduate with viticulture and oenology options. He has an extensive experience in viticulture and vineyard management, and he is the founder and owner of the Bellingar estates. Welcome, Evan. It's nice to have you on the podcast. How are you? How is the season going?
So far, so good. It's been, we've had kind of a string of uneven vintages early on here in Oregon, and this has been good. We had some early weather that led to a lot of good shoot growth, and now for the past couple weeks, it's been cooler. But we don't worry until we hit bloom. If bloom is late, then we're late, and but until then, it's just the preseason.
Exactly. Well, we are hoping for the best season this year. Could you tell us a bit more about the beginning of your story? How did you decide to study horticulture, which is quite a rare option? Very few people study horticulture. Actually, I was one of them in Romania who studied horticulture, so we are on the same page with this one. How did you choose this path?
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so I'm originally from Northwest Washington, and I did not grow up on a family farm, and I think my great grandmother had a dairy farm, but for several generations we'd just been city dwellers. But growing up, I always loved growing plants. I loved, you're literally creating life. You are photosynthesizing. I remember one of my earliest memories was in Montessori school, just growing a little corn shoot, and just the color of the sunlight through the corn was just magical to me. And so I always loved gardening, always loved plants, always loved being outside. And when I thought about what I wanted to do for a career, I did not want to be in an office. I wanted to grow plants. And in Northwest Washington, that would have been, at the time, raspberries or like nurserymen. But I also felt a real draw to wine grapes. There was so much history there, so much, layers of society, history, religion, geology, everything, that even though I didn't drink wine as a child, I always thought it would be very fun to do. So that was kind of my goal. And in Northwest Washington, there's not a lot of grapes grown. There are a lot in Eastern Washington, which is much more of a desert climate. But then in Western Oregon, there was a fairly new and growing industry. And so I came down to Corvallis to go to Oregon State. And my sense was, hey, it's kind of a smaller school. It's a smaller industry. It's not a big state like California. And so I thought it would be a little bit easier to break in as just somebody who wants to do it. And that turned out to have been fairly accurate.
Wow, that's awesome. Actually, that's interesting. There might be some misinformation about you out there, because in one of the articles, I'm sure that it said that you grew up in a family of farmers. In one of the articles that I've read about you, so that there must be a mistake.
That might be a bit inaccurate. My dad was like a welder and structural steel guy. My mother had a storage complex. And yeah, going back enough generations, which is true for a lot of Americans, we were farmers, but it was a few back.
if we go back enough generations, then everybody
Yep.
has an origin of farmers. Yeah. So how was your time at the horticulture university? How is that you were the first one with viticulture and enology options?
I loved my education at Oregon State. It was a great program. It was a well-regarded program, but it wasn't, I would say, a large program. I forget how many horticulture students were in it at the time, but it would have been quite small compared to what it is now. And I knew Oregon State had a good horticulture program, but I didn't necessarily know that they had a viticulture enology program, which they essentially didn't when I started. As I was going through school, they decided to create one, and which has now since grown quite a bit. And some of my classes, it seemed like it was, two professors and me kind of thing, or a professor, me, and the guy a year behind me, Travis Cook, who I work with as well. And so very, very small classes in some of those viticulture focused ones. But I loved it because it was also a fairly broad education in horticulture. So I still often think about my plant ID classes. I think about the classes that talk about hazelnuts and blueberries and tree fruits. And because sometimes it's possible, I think, to be a little narrow and not think about like the broader world of plants and different options.
Exactly. Horticulture is a very beautiful and very wide field. And I had a similar experience from my class. There were like not only me, but a very few people who were going down the road of the viticulture and winemaking. Most of the people were studying or focusing more on like fruit growing, vegetables, and all that stuff. So it's pretty niche, but as you said, I totally agree that it's always good to have like a wider field of view because you can apply so many interesting things and even combine even at an estate. So as I read, you were managing the Oregon State University's vineyard research at some point. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, with the benefit of hindsight, that was just a really big break for me in my career. So Scott Robbins, who oversaw several of their research horticulture farms, one of those research horticulture farms was Woodhull 3 Vineyard, which had been donated to the university in the 1980s. And Scott needed help to manage it, and more than manage, like actually do the work. And so I had tried and failed to get some experience because when you have an education in something, that doesn't mean folks want to hire you because particularly in agriculture, employers want skilled people who can do the work, not just somebody who knows about the theory. And I think that's a real fear sometimes is, hey, this college person's not going to want to actually get out there and do it. And so Scott needed student help, and I forget exactly how I got that job, but I got it. And I met with Scott, and I was like, I don't know much, but I'm trainable. And he's like, well, then you're hired. So it was really fun because I got the direct experience in the vineyard. He would oftentimes go up and we'd work side by side, or he'd give me the broad strokes because some other crop was really busy, and I'd drive out there and do it as long as I could and then come back. So it was just an absolutely great experience. It was also very interesting to get some exposure to the other horticulture farms because, once again, talking about broad versus narrow, those horticulture farms might have literally dozens of different crops growing on them. So, okay, a blueberry trial, the World Pear Collection, cherry research, organic cider apples. And Scott would sometimes need some help. Okay, run this machine in that. And it was just a huge amount of learning. And I really respect Scott for a lot of reasons, but one is that broad knowledge of horticulture and, okay, this piece of equipment with this crop at this time, it would be very challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine, and that outlook of curiosity and being open to learn, I think, is the best way to start in any field. What were the exact things that you were researching at the university?
I personally didn't do any research, but our goal was an open canvas for researchers. And so we needed to do kind of the farming, keep it all in line, and then researchers could come in. At that time, there was some research about rootstocks, there was research about clones, there was research about the different way roots infiltrated and things like that. So our job was to do the farming, and the researchers could then come in and do their specific task.
I see, I see. That must have been very interesting and a very valuable knowledge for you, especially in the moment managing your own vineyard. So after the Oregon State University, you had another different vineyard management job, if I'm.
Yeah, so my boss, Scott Robbins, we also became friends, made wine in his garage, or his barn, I should say. And he went to school many years prior with a gentleman named Buddy Beck. And this was in 2005, 2006. And Buddy was looking for folks who essentially wanted to work in managing vineyards. And so I met him, and there was just very few folks coming out of programs. One, because the programs didn't exist, and there were just very few of us. And so got hired on with Buddy, and his job was designing, developing, and managing vineyards here in the Northern Willamette Valley. We started, I think we had about 250 acres, and we grew that to about 350 in my 5 years there. So that was very interesting, and the kind of polar opposite of being on my own at Woodhall Vineyard it was 5 acres or 7 acres, and it was all on me, as opposed to quite a few sites, managing crews, putting it all together, managing clients, working with winemakers. It was going kind of from 0 to 60 pretty fast.
I can imagine, and it is for sure a very different environment, managing a vineyard for research and managing a vineyard for winemaking and for a profit-oriented business. So I think these two were quite complementary for you, because the vineyard, the research vineyard, you could learn the basics and the management of the wine, the biology, the botanics of it, and the other side, managing in a business way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always loved managing other sites and multiple sites, because in one site, in 1 year, you get one go at fruit thinning, you get one go at leaf pulling, you get one go at all these different tasks. But with multiple sites, you get, if you're managing 10, 15 vineyards, you get 10, 15 swings at all of these items. You get 10, 15 expressions of terroir. You get that kind of metadata in a sense, which I found very valuable. It feels like, although it's a lot of work, you're kind of accruing experience a little bit faster than if you were at one spot.
Exactly. Wow, that's exactly true. This is an accelerated learning curve. We always say that a winemaker has only like 50 or 60 vintages that he can try in a lifetime. But in this sense, that was a very good way to try your hands on many things. So after these combining these experiences, what led you to decide to start your own estate, the Bellingar estate?
Yeah, and so I always knew we wanted to do this, my wife and I, and we went to Burgundy. I forget which year, but we had been making wine in the garage for 10 years at the time, and so this would have been 2014 maybe-ish. And we were so enthralled with, we visited Joseph Drouhin and the just centuries of history there, going back to the Roman wall that's down in their cellar, which is just amazing. And we were struck by a thought that every single winery, especially these multi-generational things, they had one thing in common, which is they started at some point. And if it was my dream to start a winery, start a wine brand, start a vineyard, at some point you got to start. It can't all just be preparation and thinking and planning, because while you're doing all that stuff, at some point, you're burning years and you're going through that 50, 60 vintages of your total lifetime career, right? And so we made that decision, like, hey, let's start something. And we started as a virtual brand, really. So we did not own our property here, no tasting room, no hope, but we didn't know that at the time, to sell wine. And we started with 500 cases of one type of Pinot Noir with the 2014 vintage. And our goal at the time was a very approachable price point, sell it through distribution, and we were both working full time. So, hey, it won't take up that much time. All of that was wrong, but we didn't know that, and at least we started.
Wow, that's always the best strategy to just start, because you can prepare as long as you want, but you cannot get that experience of starting, failing. So that was a good call. I didn't know that was a virtual brand, as you mentioned. So can you elaborate more on that? In 2014, right?
Yeah, and if you read books like The Lean Startup, the goal is to get into a product as soon as possible, show that product to a customer, and then only when the customer chats with you and buys it or doesn't, that's when you know something. Everything else is absolutely just theory. And so that's part of the reason we wanted to start something rather than buy a vineyard, plant it, 4 or 5 years later go by, and then, oh geez, we don't like the wines, or then we don't like the label, all these things. So that was the goal, which was to get started, get some momentum going, get some sales going. And with the benefit of hindsight, it essentially did not work. So distribution is challenging. I still have challenges with distribution. It's like, what is the market asking for? And at that time, and still, I think today, at least with my wines, the market in the grocery store is not asking for Pinot Noir at that price point, that customers don't already know. I think I tried to get into Costco in those early years, but it's like, even if I had gotten into Costco, how would somebody walking by know my brand, know that that price point is a good value for that brand, and grab it? And I didn't have any of that branding, none of that marketing, none of that social media, none of that story, and really none of the effort, because I was doing that, after work, trying to get distributors and things like that, and it just didn't work.
I see. So the first attempts were failing, and then what did you change afterwards, after these
Yeah, so
experiences?
fast forwarding a little bit to 2016, we purchased our property that would become this place, and we call it Warriors Rest Vineyard. It's now 10 acres of grapes, and with this, we have a tasting room where one-on-one folks can come in, we can tell our story. We're making wines that are tied to place, either this place or some of the other vineyards I've worked with in the past. And it's kind of the opposite of a commodity, because wine grapes sometimes are traded like a commodity, a big oversupply year, and it's just, hey, this is just Oregon Pinot, right? What's that sell for per ton? But out of this tasting room, I can say, this is Warriors Rest Pinot Noir from 2021. It got this score. This is how we farmed it that year. And this isn't a representation of Oregon. This is a representation of this tiny parcel. And so that cherry, that velvet, that wonderful wine you're tasting, that's just from here. And so you can charge more money for it. You're not traveling across the country trying to sell it FOB by the pallet. It's everything about it for us and for our scale works so much better than the opposite. So we've kind of bookended the attempts at the wine business between a small number of generic SKUs, and now we'll have a relatively larger number, smaller, more niche, more terroir driven, more fun.
I see. So when you saw that your wine was too niche for this market, as you described it, you decided to go even nicher, even more narrow path to succeed in that. Wow, that's a very, very cool strategy. So this means, as I understand, that you mostly focus on the wine tourism and selling from out of the cellar.
That's right. So now we're essentially exclusively estate. We do a little bit of distribution, but that's um, more for, we've got a distributor in Northwest Washington who we've worked with for years. But as a percentage of our business, it's the minority. And we do some work with local B&Bs to get some of our wines in front of their customers. But we're probably 90% direct to consumer out of this tasting room and the wine club.
Oh wow, that's great. And as you mentioned, that's the most fun to talk to the people, talk to the customers. It's a very meaningful experience. I also sometimes host wine tastings, and it's so cool. Even especially when people are interested and they want to learn about the wine, they want to learn about winemaking, and they are interested in the stories. That's the best feeling. And I think it's not just like on this personal level, but in business terms, in the long term, these connections, these experiences create the real loyalty. And it's a lot more meaningful than selling maybe 5 times more wine in the store where no one cares, just buys the wine for that evening.
My wife's uncle, Fred, has a picture in his office of one of his sons surrounded by grapes and grape leaves. And he took that photo at Sokol Blosser in what would have been, I guess, the early 80s. And every time he sees that picture, he thinks about Sokol Blosser and that wonderful moment when his son was young. And he has a real connection to that place and that story and that brand. And he'll have that for the rest of his life. And we can create those memories here with consumers, with families. We weren't even here, and there was a couple that got engaged at our tasting room.
Oh wow.
They walked over from our bungalows and saw the vines. There was the tasting room. The whole thing was all together, and the gentleman proposed. And then they go off about their day, now newly engaged, and they send us an email. Oh, we got engaged at your property. Isn't that amazing? And we are part of their story forever. There'll be hopefully generations of children that look back on that as like, oh wow, that all started for grandma and grandpa there. And to me, that's such an amazing honor that we can be part of people's, the tapestry of their lives.
Exactly, creating memories and building these personal valuable connections. So how do you imagine the future of your estate? As you mentioned, it's a family estate. You were inspired by the legacy of the Burgundy chateaus and that thing. Do you imagine this way for yourself in the long run?
I have a very embarrassing spreadsheet from when I started in 2014, and it was like, okay, 500 cases, then 1,000 cases, then 1,500 cases, and very quickly I was going to get to 40,000 cases. I was like, okay, then we'll think about it. And obviously we did a big pivot there. Our goal for the winery would be if we could make, 1,000, 2,000 cases of wine, if we can share it with folks here at the tasting room and make a couple bucks doing that, I would rather do that than be big. I like people coming out. I like people trying our wines, and I'd rather make as great a wine as we can and sell them directly, even if that's 200 cases per wine, rather than scale. And that took a lot for me to get over, because I think in bigger, better, all that. But I'd rather have something small and replicatable, so to speak. It doesn't always have to be about growth. And this is kind of a funner part of the business. It's more friendly. I was just chatting with somebody who had a food truck here at the winery, and she worked in her career as a paramedic, and she got burned out. And in a paramedic's world, every person you meet, your customer, so to speak, it's possibly the worst day of their life. And it's just not very much fun. In hospitality and winemaking, people are here on vacation. This is not, if not the best day of their life, it's one of the better days of their year. It's one of the better days of their week. They're happy to be here. They want to try some wine. They want to relax in the sunshine. it's what I think is important about like life and business, that it can be sustainable and fun and happy, and that counts.
Wow, that's a wonderful philosophy. And I think it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even mean that it's not scaling, because by doing this, you are scaling the amount of people that you can maybe host. And by doing it, repeating, hosting wine tastings, you get better and better, and you can provide an even more meaningful experience. So I don't think that this means that it is like slowing down or something. You can maximize your knowledge and output even in this strategy or this way of doing business.
Yeah, and we do have three wonderful children, and in an ideal world, one or many of them would want to work in the business. And I think part of the way we would do that is not have my kids see their dad and mom work to death in this business, right? And so take on a huge amount of debt to have a lot of inventory, to then travel to sell the inventory. And then the kids wonder, hey, why is dad not here? Well, it's because he's out traveling to some distant land to sell, a half a pallet of wine if it goes well. And that's the lowest you'll ever sell a bottle of wine for, is FOB to a distributor. And so we want a business that ideally would make a few dollars, that doesn't take all of our effort and our time and our life, so that the kids don't see it as this big drain. And so it might be something good that they would want to be a part of, rather than, here's your dad's legacy, work your whole life just like he did. I don't think that's enticing to kids. If my dad had done something like that, I wouldn't want to take it over.
I totally agree. Congratulations to your three kids, and I wish good health to them. And I think your approach is very smart. And lots of people have this challenge of building something and wishing for their kids to continue it, but very few find this approach the way to do it, because you don't want to pressure your children. You don't want to push them into a career that they don't want. That's always a bad thing. But deep down, a lot of people still think that at the end it would be beautiful for them to continue. And I think your approach is one of the best ways to do it, just to show example that this is a nice path. This is a very valuable advice for me, because we are expecting our first child this summer. So
Congratulations.
Thank you. So we are also already thinking about lots of parenting and all these sort of things.
Well, and children and vines, I would say, change your time scale. When I, before kids and before vines, I think about this year and my career kind of thing, right? But when you have children, or when you plant a vine that's going to be there for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the end of their story is long after the end of my story, right? And so we want to give our kids a good start and launch them, but they're a huge part of our legacy, and they're going to be out there doing whatever it is they're going to be doing, AI management of vineyards or whatever it is, for decades after we're gone. So it's interesting to think on a longer time scale, and it's a change.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. The raising children and raising grapevines.
In finance, they're thinking about the next quarter, and it's like, okay, how can we maximize shareholder value in 3 months, as opposed to, how can we set this vineyard up for a century of productive farming? How can we set our family up to be successful for a generation and 2 and 3 and 4?
Exactly. You can't hurry things in winemaking, especially if you are thinking about like winemaking as an art, or trying to create something valuable. But because there are some strategies or some areas where winemaking is a bit faster than normal. But yeah, this is the way. So can you tell us more about your estate? I know that you are very focused on Pinot Noir. Maybe that is from the Burgundy inspiration.
Yeah, so I'll start with how we found the property.
Okay.
My wife and I, on the side, invest in some real estate. And so for years, I was always on Zillow looking for properties. And we saw this property 5 years before we ended up purchasing it. It was on Zillow. It was so far out of our price range as you wouldn't even dream of it involving like winning the lottery. Um, but we saw it would work out absolutely perfect for us. It had a main house. It had a couple of auxiliary houses now that are bungalows. It had 12 acres of old hazelnuts that were not productive as hazelnuts anymore. But I had a suspicion that it would work really well for vines because in my career managing vineyards for others, I had planted another vineyard a few miles down the road at the same quite low elevation that in my books reading in school would have been too low to make great wine grapes. But we had done that for a neighbor, and it ended up making really good Pinot Noir, and according to them, like exceptional Chardonnay. And so I thought, and the yields generally were higher, they were richer, they ripened earlier. And for the kinds of wines we wanted to make, that was perfect. And so we kind of always watched this, and then ended up, years go by, price comes down, and it was like, and the finances kind of met the dream a little bit, or at least got closer. And so we went and viewed the property for the first time, met the wonderful owner whose name was Adelina Slocum. And I think she was 92, around there at the time when we looked at the property. And she had been born on the property. Her parents were Italian immigrants. Her dad had purchased the property with his discharge pay from World War I. And so we named the vineyard in his honor and called it Warrior's Rest. And Adelina had all these great stories. Here, there was prohibition in the 1930s, and that was when Adelina was growing up. So she's this little girl, and her Italian dad is making wine. I believe, was frowned upon at the time. And so her job was like walk down to the road, and if anybody drove by or walked by, she'd run up and tell her dad to hide the wine. And so she just had all sorts of great stories of living here for over 90 years. And we were able to purchase the property. And the hazelnuts were very old, they're very blighted. And I've got some videos of my wife, Kim, literally just like getting a tree rocking and then pushing it over, just barehanded. And so it was time for those trees to come out. We took out about half the hazelnuts and then planted 2 acres of Pinot Noir, 3 acres of Chardonnay in 2017. And to me, that was kind of a disproportionately high amount of Chardonnay, but I knew I wanted to give Chardonnay a shot. And when we did our most recent planting last year, we finished it out with Pinot. So now we're like 6 acres of Pinot and 3 acres of Chardonnay, which I think is a good balance.
Wow, that's a very nice story. I wanted to ask you about the origin of the name of the Warrior's Rest.
Yeah, it was. I didn't want to name it after the land after myself. I'm already like not humble and named the winery after myself, but I always thought a vineyard should have its own name, and then if it sells, if it transfers, that name stays with the vineyard because it says something about that land. And so that's what we wanted to represent. And that family was here for almost 100 years, and we wanted to honor that legacy. It's not just all about us.
Exactly. I think that is beautiful to have these special names for vineyards. Actually, we are doing the same. We also have a very small family winery in Transylvania, and we also have for each plot small vineyards a name from the person, similarly as your story that we bought the vineyard from. One vineyard had a giant chestnut tree on the side of it, so that's the chestnut vineyard. And actually, a funny story: when I was a student at the Horticulture University, at one of the summers, I went to the US for like a student program to work there. And from that money that I earned in the US, I came back and bought a very, very small plot of vineyard. And now that vineyard is called the American vineyard because I bought that from the money that I earned in the US. So that's very cool to name vineyards. And these, I think it's even a very cool way to tell stories about the vineyard when people come and you have wine tastings. People are interested in these like stories to connect with the.
I love that. And what we're trying to pivot away from is I don't necessarily want to sell wine or Pinot Noir or Oregon Pinot Noir necessarily, because once you say that, you are cueing in somebody's mind, okay, what do they think about wine or Pinot or Oregon Pinot? But if you say, oh, this is from the American vineyard, where I, went as a young man and made some money, brought it back here and bought this, and since then it's been making all these wines, it's like you're instantly in their head creating this new story and this new memory. Then it links to the parts of your brain in smell and memory and taste, and that's really powerful. So I totally agree. Like that's, I think, the trend that we're going, and I think wine needs to go. Let's tell small human stories more than kind of the bigger ones, because I think that's what we're trained to remember. Like language is not that old in evolutionary history, but our ability to think of a story and remember that is older. And so you're tapping into this really deep human programming when we tell those stories.
Of course, I totally agree. Every single knowledge in the ancient times were communicated through stories, not like in today's educational systems when we try to teach kids the exact formulas, but it was ingrained in the story, in the wisdom of the people, and that's the way it was transferred through generations. So it's the same with these things. This is the best way to communicate them. So as you mentioned that it has the land, it was a very unique choice. People at the beginning were skeptical if it was fit for winemaking or for Pinot Noir. What are your experiences after these years? What are the unique terroir effects?
It's always exciting when you're right, or at least not wrong, because it's really a huge bet financially to say, hey, this acre of land is going to make great wine, whether that's at our elevation or at higher elevation. We're all betting. We're all in farming. There's a lot of gambling, and so we were absolutely thrilled. Our first crop was in 2020, and we love the wines. The baby vines in Pinot, it was just this cherry on top of cherry on top of cherry. It was just such a pure expression of that bright, elegant Pinot Noir aroma. And I'm not trying to like ride on the Dundee Hills' coattails, but Dundee Hills is one of the more famous AVAs in Oregon, and we're not in the Dundee Hills, but that delicate cherry, that velvet tannin, that kind of rose petal aromatics, I see a lot of correlations with that. So, and we're actually fairly close, a couple miles down the road. And so that was a big relief where it's like, okay, what I've put my life savings into makes wine that tastes good. So that's always one. And I've been really thrilled with our Chardonnay as well. The first generation of Oregon Chardonnays, sometimes were a bit troubled. It was a different climate for sure. We were growing different clones that were really selected for yield down in California. And the first generation of Chardonnays were not well received in Oregon. We're part of kind of a Chardonnay renaissance now, where people are treating it as best they can. So they want yield limited clones. They want to clonally blend. We want to blend in the field as well. So doing some selection mésal things and aging that and fermenting that in new oak and neutral oak to some extent. And so those Chardonnays to me are really exciting. They're I think in time will rival the best in the world if they don't already. And so that's really fun to me to really try to move the needle in what Oregon Chardonnay can do.
I see, I see. Yeah, in the recent years, the Chardonnay, especially the California Chardonnays, had a little bit of a bad reputation with over oaking and all the very similar styles all over California. But yeah, I can see that Renaissance is coming, and there are a little bit more exciting and more focused on the Chardonnay and less on the oak and the vanilla.
Yeah, and I think it's probably even tougher in Chardonnay to be expressive of terroir in a way that Pinot, it's almost easier to get it to express that site. With Chardonnay, I think we've learned as an industry when's a better time to pick it, how you oak it to bring out some of that sense of place. I think it's harder in Chardonnay than Pinot, but when you do it, it's great.
Yeah, it's a very difficult grape. Beside these two grapes, are there any varieties that you are playing with or planning to try?
This cuts me deeply because in my career managing vineyards, I was always telling folks to, hey, try a little bit of an experiment, innovate something. And I was very close to planting Pinot Blanc. I was very close to planting Gamay Noir. I think there's a huge number of grape varieties that Oregon could do really well. But ultimately, I lost my courage, and it's just Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So I think particularly like Pinot Blanc, Oregon can make an excellent example of that. Pinot Gris is, I think, still our number 2 grape variety in Oregon, and widely planted in the 90s, but much less so since then. But you just can't command the price that it takes to farm selling Pinot Gris. The cap seems to be, around $20 a bottle for Gris, whereas for Chardonnay, the cap is well north of $60 for the best Chardonnays. And so if I could make the best Gris and sell it for $30 or the best Chardonnay and sell it for $100, the math kind of pushes me towards that.
Yeah.
So to my great discredit, I did not try anything cool.
a similar pattern as it was at the beginning of the starting the estate, going into deeper in the rabbit hole and choosing a very niche. But I think that's also very valuable, because this way you can master these two varieties, and with all the experience and data that you can collect, it still can be exciting.
Yeah, and thinking about it from a customer's perspective, if we can create, not even talking about different wines, we can create a Chardonnay, we can create a Pinot Noir. You could make a sparkling Pinot Noir, you could make a sparkling Chardonnay, you could make a rosé from Pinot Noir, you could make a white Pinot Noir, and then you can make a higher and a lower end of any of those things. So from this, 9 acres, we could create a lot of different wines. And so I feel like that was kind of enough, so to speak. And we didn't want to have 30 wines in the tasting room.
Exactly. What do you think about the number of selections, the effect of the number of selections on the customers in this way? Because lots of wineries... It's
interesting, and a story I tell folks in wine generally is our best-selling wines out of the tasting room are our most expensive, and our worst-selling ones are our most approachable. And we thought for years, hey, it's important to make a wine that's really approachable for a lot of reasons. But one is we want to get younger folks of legal drinking age, but past that, into wine, millennials, and then soon the Gen Zs and things like that. And it can't all be high-end wines. And I still very much believe that. So we want kind of different offerings, but price point wise, when people are coming to wine country, they want kind of the best, regardless of price. And that was very interesting to me. But I think that's something we debate in the tasting room. It's like, you don't want to confuse people with choice. And okay, here's 9 wines, and the confused mind doesn't choose, right? And so we try to do more like okay, now a rosé, a Chardonnay, a couple Pinots, and a bigger red. So that way you're kind of narrowing the focus. And so it makes it easier to say this one or this one rather than, oh my gosh, they were all great, you know.
Yeah, I think that approach of having lots of different grape varieties and multiple labels is for those wineries that have this strategy of being on all the shelves and selling mostly in stores, because then in that setup it's all about numbers game, the law of big numbers. And if you cover all the different label styles and all the different grape varieties, that can work. But in this path that you have chosen, and that I also like, and would like to continue on, this approach that you explained of having a smaller selection and focusing and creating higher end wines, especially if you're selling directly to the customers. This is the better approach. And there are lots of examples. All the legendary huge chateaus in Bordeaux, in Burgundy, all of those chateaus have very few wines, two or maximum three.
In Oregon, I think we'll forever be looking to Burgundy as the pinnacle. And what does Burgundy grow? Mostly Pinot Noir Chardonnay. Yeah. So that's they do it well. They've been doing it for a great many centuries, going back to the Romans. And so I think we have to listen to that. Yeah, and it's like, and it's tough for me because I love to innovate. I love to try new wines. But it's like, okay, maybe one day I'll buy 2 tons of Gamay Noir and make some amazing wine, and then maybe not make it for a few years. And I think that can add some more interest to folks, to a wine club, to a tasting. If like, oh, well, if I miss it this time, I'll always be here next year.
Yeah, limited edition. That's cool. And the Oregon climate is pretty similar to the Burgundy, right? And use
in many ways
varieties.
Yeah, I would say so. I think we're closer to the ocean. To expose my ignorance of French geography, I think we're a bit closer to the ocean, and so the temperatures I think are a bit more moderated. But we're also a Mediterranean climate, if you can believe it, when it's raining all winter. But we get rain very reliably, November, December, January, February, March, and then depending on the year into April, May, and sometimes a little bit of June. But then when the rain stops, it generally stops all growing season. So July is dry, August is dry, September is dry, generally. And so it is, I think, a different farming environment. A huge amount of Oregon is still dry farmed. We've got soils that have enough clay where they can save up that moisture from the fall and winter and release it slowly to the vines. But we don't get the summer rains that Burgundy does. And as is my understanding, we have different and lower disease pressures because of that.
Okay, I see. And you have quite a long growing season, right?
Yeah, bud break is typically around April 11th, and then harvest. We usually have canopy up until October and a little bit past that, but usually harvesting these days September into October. When I first started farming, it was more like October, sometimes into November, but it seems to have come in.
Come closer. And you said that you are very interested in technology and innovation. What kind of technologies or innovations are you using to improve the quality or efficiency at your estate? A very funny thing we should, I think, play it for the viewers. One of your viral videos, it went lots of circles around the internet with the laser protection against the birds. Lots of people who didn't understand the concept thought that it's like it's from Star Wars and it's slicing up the birds. So
you never get to choose your legacy. I think it just happens. So it would not surprise me if in my obituary it says, Evan Bellingar, husband, father, blah, 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 and laser guy. So a good friend of mine has a blueberry crop farm, and over a couple of ciders, he and I decided we're going to try this new technology of a laser that keeps invasive starlings out of areas. So it would keep it out of a vineyard, keep it out of his blueberries. So, okay, let's do that. So a couple years ago, we get it. And I think fairly innocuous looking. It's a laser, and it runs all day on a pre-programmed path, and it keeps the birds out. Human eyes can't see it during the day, but apparently birds can. And it's the far extent of the radius. It might be moving at 20, 30 miles an hour. To the birds, it looks like this, 600-foot solid beam of green, and they don't like it. It looks unnatural, and so they just don't come in there. So I thought it looked a little bit cool as night fell, because now it looks like this big laser beam from Star Wars. And so I would run it a few minutes extra every night and take a couple videos. And the first year we had a little bit of, if I was seeing 400 views on a thing, this one was viewed 1,000 times. So it was like a little bit of a bump. But then in 2023, it just went viral, essentially. And the first time we posted it went to millions of folks, huge number of comments, a lot of folks misinterpreting what was happening. But the irony of the social media age is my video without much context saw millions of views. Then I did a great number of explainer videos. The birds are not dying. The birds are not hurt. Nothing is being blinded. It doesn't shoot the birds, doesn't evaporate anything, et cetera, et cetera. Those were seen by many hundreds of people. So it's like, there's an old adage, like a lie can make it around the world while the truth is still putting his pants on. And that was the case, where it was like the original video just went many times viral and the explanation just didn't. So yeah, it was. And even as I repost those, as people have questions about it, it continues to go viral. I posted a couple weeks ago, and it's closing in on 11 million views again. And on the negative side, there's folks that literally just don't understand what agriculture is about, don't understand that, starlings are invasive in Oregon, and if we don't control them at all, we would have no crop, essentially. But on the positive side, it's a great example to be able to educate people about what we do. And there's been some people that have come in pretty spicy in the comments, but as you can kind of go back and forth with them, learn where they're from, learn what they do, a lot of times you can make a friend, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. We also noticed this, that with videos that are maybe a little bit confusing and hard to understand for the general consumer, or people who are not even interested in the wine industry, because that's very interesting about these short form platforms like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, that it doesn't necessarily show the videos specifically to the people who are interested in that type of content. It's pretty random. So videos can blow up in areas that are very, very, very weird and interesting. For example, we get lots of comments. Some of our videos, like wine barrel cleanings or something, goes viral in maybe Arabic countries. And obviously, people are not really interested about alcohol in those countries, and we get a lot of comments about that. So it's really hard to understand these algorithms. But I think with these comments, with people who are not understanding, I really admire your effort that you are trying to convince and explain to some people. But at some point, it's quite impossible to do it and to convince people if they are wrong.
And I'm I've been I was a late adopter to social media, but the more I see it, the more I see the power that we can create a global community. You can make friends across the world and have conversations that otherwise you never would have had. And I've been shocked, just in just a tiny slice, the amount of amazing horticulture in Turkey, in Iran, like in parts of the Middle East, just fascinating. And I see these folks growing all these crazy different grape varieties. table grapes in Japan, where they're putting seemingly 10 times the labor that we would ever do in wine grapes. It's just, to me, very fascinating. And I miss that about the university and horticulture program, is to see broad new things in horticulture. And I think social media is a way to do that. And you just see this, a gentleman in China with a backpack sprayer spraying all these, 16 rows of rice or whatever he's doing, or the crazy grape varieties, or what people are doing across the world to feed the world. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and actually that's the way we met each other on Instagram, and that's why this podcast is happening, being almost, I think, exactly on the other side of the globe. What time is it in there in Oregon?
It right now is 10 a.m.
10 a.m. Okay, so it's 8 p.m. here, almost 12 hours difference.
Oh my gosh.
Almost.
Well, thanks
exactly.
for staying up. Yeah.
It's okay. 8 p.m. is not that late. So, yeah, it's a very interesting but truly an inspiring way to follow all these horticultural trends, especially on Instagram. I don't know why Instagram has lots of horticulture and agriculture videos, or maybe we are in this loop following these videos, but I also see a lot of those that you mentioned.
Well, and 400 years ago, we could have been on a farm and learned from our dads, and how would we get new information on ways to do things? And a few years ago, I saw a suckering brush on Instagram, and I was like, "That's cool." And then I got some, and then we, the company I worked for, we loved them and used them a lot. And it's like, all from seeing one little 5-second video on Instagram, and it's like, I think it can be and should be a broad net good for society, that we can educate, we can make friendships and communicate. I think it's great.
Of course, I also think that the positive side is is bigger than the negative side. All these negative comments and the misinterpretations of the videos, I think on those people who have maybe a bad feeling about the video, it's a very small effect, a very short. They are just scrolling, see something, misunderstand, comment something bad, and then they just go over and go on with their lives. But these little positive moments, experiences, connections, discovering new equipment, ideas, these have longer effects. What other misconceptions did you discover about winemaking, or are you facing or saw?
One thing I don't have the courage yet to do to post on social is just about like herbicides and fungicides. And having the tasting room now, it's shocking how many folks just assume all viticulture is organic, and they assume in organics there are no pesticides sprayed, and that's not the case. And so I think that's something that conventional, or I should say sustainable agriculture, really needs to do more of, and is tell our story. And so if we think it's okay to spray a specific herbicide at a specific time for a specific, task, if we think that's okay, we ought to have the courage to talk about it. If we are using a pesticide, but it happens to be synthetic, but it's more focused and more targeted, I think we should talk about it, because I think we're missing an opportunity to educate, and we'll wake up in 20 years when our products aren't desired by the market because they have this sense of what's going on, or like perhaps a misguided sense of what's going on. And so it's up to all of us on any side of any issue to tell our story in a respectful way, so that folks know what we're doing and why. I think that counts for a lot.
Yeah, I see that, and I think there is lots of misconceptions and confusion in this area of organic, not organic systems. Some of the legislation is very confusing all over the world. The wine industry is a very international community, and all these legislations are different in the EU, in the US, not even talking about the rest of the world. lots of things mean different things in these different countries. So the consumers are very confused. And on top of that, I also have a little issue with with one thing in the wine industry, which I'm also not didn't really talk about it yet, but I want to, is the biodynamics movement, which is confusing a lot of people. And to be honest, it's very for me it's very unsympathetic, and I think it does more harm than good, because this idea of doing magic and bringing the chakra of the universe and all these ideas create this image that organ even more confusion in the customers, and people who read those things or understand what they are saying, it destroys the image of the wine industry. People think that we are these magic voodoo people spinning the water to get some universe magic.
I almost didn't get a job once because I'd written an article in the local paper about why I didn't think that biodynamics was perhaps science-based. So I'll try to be as careful and as diplomatic as I can. But I've read several books on biodynamics, and they spin the water to create a cone, and that cone is taking energy from the cosmos and putting it down into the water, and you put on your vines. Well, that's interesting. And so I would just want all of us, if we're science-based in the winery, and you're doing A to B testing, this works better than this. If we're science-based in our personal lives, hey, we're going to take medicines that are developed through science and things. Let's perhaps be consistent and look at the whole world with the same level of intellectual rigor.
Totally. But very, very few people. I think you are the first person that I'm talking with who has this. I mean, I'm not sure what other people. I'm not bringing this up, so there might be a lot of people who think this, but very few people are talking about this, and I think we should, because this is very confusing and very inconsistent, as you said, with scientific rigor.
And I have a lot of friends that do that, and I love them, and I will apologize to them profusely. But yeah.
Exactly. We are not saying not to do that. I'm not proposing to prohibit biodynamics, but I think not everybody, but lots of people who are getting into this culture, this, we could say, religion, because it's like a religion of biodynamics, they are very sometimes aggressive about it, and they try to convince people and the wine community and a lot of customers that this is the way and all the other ways are wrong and harmful and bad. And I think that's the danger. And all the consumers who believe that and get into it, a lot of them don't even understand what the idea behind biodynamics is. A lot of people confuse it with like general organic. Oh, it's biodynamic, it's like organic, it's something, but they don't necessarily understand the universe magic ideas. Yeah, so the biodynamics movement is a bit interesting. What was the since you started in 2014, you said you explained to us the difficulties at the beginning. What was your proudest moment since then?
That's a good question. Proudest moment in the wine industry. There's been a lot of them, but I just am filled with pride and thankfulness when we have an event here and folks come, and I feel like we're building a community. Like there's folks, it's something as simple as enjoying time with their friends and their family. We've hosted birthday parties. We've hosted for the very young and the very old, and it's fun. And I want to, our goal, I think, is to be a part of the fabric of people's lives. Wine is a part of the fabric of my life, sometimes too much, but I think it's natural to be a part of that bigger story. And so that kind of in the bigger sense is something we're very proud of. That's kind of on the people side. You know, we're proud that we've made this property a vineyard estate and continue to try to improve it to make it more welcoming for folks to come. So proud of the work, and we'll keep going.
Well, I think that's a very beautiful closing. I would like to thank you for doing this. It was a very interesting conversation. I hope that we can do this one day in person as well. And I would like to thank our followers for watching. Don't forget to check out Ivan's Instagram profile and their website. Check out their wines. And if you're in the area, don't forget to visit them. And thanks for watching.
Thanks so much.